For 12 years, my life seemed picture perfect. I had a loving wife, a beautiful home, and the kind of marriage many would envy. We were the couple everyone looked up to, strong, inseparable, and in love. Or so I believed. I met her when I was 28, and from the very first conversation, I knew she was the one. We spent hours talking about everything, our dreams, our fears, and how we wanted to build a life together. Within a year, we were married, and the future felt limitless. We created memories that would last a lifetime. Vacations to places we'd always dreamed of, late-night conversations under the stars, and the kind of partnership that gave me strength in my hardest moments. But in life, there are moments that test even the strongest bonds. Sometimes, you see them coming. Other times, they hit you when you least expect it. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined, was how one decision, one single choice, could change everything. This is the story of how my wife, after 12 years of marriage, decided to go on a date against my wishes, and the consequences that followed. Before we begin, I want to thank you for tuning in to Wild Love Story. If you enjoy stories that reveal the raw, unfiltered truth about relationships, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss what happens next. Let me take you back to where it all began. When life was simpler, love felt effortless, and I was certain nothing could ever come between us. I first met her at a small get-together hosted by mutual friends. She wasn't the kind of person who demanded attention when she walked into a room, but somehow, I noticed her immediately. She had this warmth about her, a way of making everyone around her feel like they mattered. We started talking, and it felt like we'd known each other for years. We laughed about the most ridiculous things, shared stories from our childhoods, and bonded over our love for classic movies. That night, I remember thinking to myself, this is someone special. I don't want to let her slip away. From that point on, things moved quickly. We started dating, and it didn't take long before I was head over heels. Every day felt like a new adventure. Weekend road trips, late-night phone calls that stretched into the early hours, and endless conversations about our dreams. We were so in sync that it felt like the universe had brought us together for a reason. When I proposed to her, it wasn't a grand gesture or some elaborate event. It was just the two of us on a quiet evening, sitting on the porch of her parents' house. I told her I couldn't imagine my life without her, and that I wanted to spend the rest of it making her happy. She said yes without hesitation, and in that moment, I felt like the luckiest man in the world. Our wedding was small, intimate, and perfect in every way. We didn't care about the fancy decorations or elaborate guest lists. All that mattered was that we were surrounded by the people we loved, and we were making a promise to each other. A promise to stand by each other no matter what life threw our way. The first few years of our marriage were everything I had hoped for. We worked hard, but we always made time for each other. Whether it was cooking dinner together, binge watching our favorite shows, or just sitting in silence and enjoying each other's company, every moment felt meaningful. We celebrated our wins, big and small. When I got my first promotion, she threw a little party at home, complete with a homemade cake. When she finished her degree, I took her out to the restaurant she'd always wanted to try. We were partners in every sense of the word, and I couldn't have been prouder of the life we were building together. Of course, like any couple, we had our disagreements, but they were never more than minor bumps in the road. We always found our way back to each other, always found a way to make things right. Our love felt unshakable, like a fortress no storm could touch. Looking back now, I can see how easy it is to take those moments for granted, to believe that because things are good today, they'll stay that way forever. At the time, I couldn't imagine a future where she and I weren't on the same team. For 12 years, we built a life that felt secure, stable, and full of love. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And I thought that was enough. I thought I knew her, truly knew her, in every way that mattered. But life has a way of testing you, of throwing challenges your way when you least expect them. And sometimes, the person you trust the most, the one you believe would never hurt you, can surprise you in ways you never thought possible. As I sit here and tell you this story, I realize how much I missed in those early years. Little things that seemed insignificant at the time but now stand out like flashing warning signs. Hindsight, as they say, is 2020. What I'm about to share with you isn't just a story about betrayal or heartbreak. It's a story about love, trust, and the choices we make when everything we thought we knew comes crashing down. And it all began with something so small, so ordinary, that I almost didn't notice it at all. It was a Tuesday evening, one of those quiet nights where nothing out of the ordinary happens. I came home from work, expecting to find her sitting in the living room with her usual book or catching up on her favorite show. But she wasn't there. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she had stepped out for a walk or gone to visit a neighbor. But when I found her in the kitchen, her back turned to me, she was completely engrossed in her phone. I called out to her, and she jumped, quickly locking the screen and shoving it into her pocket. I teased her about it, asking if she was planning a surprise for me, but she laughed it off and said it was nothing. At the time, I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She had never given me a reason to doubt her before. But looking back now, that was the first moment when I felt something shift, even if I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Over the next few weeks, small changes started to creep in. Subtle things that didn't seem like much on their own but began to add up. She started staying up later than usual, glued to her phone or her laptop. When I asked her what she was doing, she'd say she was just catching up on work or watching videos. Then, there were the excuses. She'd cancel plans we'd made together at the last minute, or say she wasn't feeling well, only for me to find out she'd gone out with friends instead. I brushed it off at first, telling myself that everyone needs their own space and time to unwind. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One night, I asked her if everything was okay. She looked surprised, almost caught off guard, but she smiled and told me everything was fine. "Why would you even ask that?" she said, laughing it off as if the very idea was absurd. I told myself I was overthinking things, that I was being paranoid for no reason. But then came the text message. It was late, close to midnight, and I was getting ready for bed when her phone lit up on the nightstand. She was in the shower, so I glanced over instinctively. The message preview was short, just a name I didn't recognize and the words, "Looking forward to it." My stomach dropped. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the curiosity and the fear was too much. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it could have been anything. A message from a colleague, a friend, someone planning an event, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling it left me with. After that, I started noticing more things. She began dressing up more than usual when she went out, even for things as simple as grocery shopping or meeting up with friends. When I asked her about it, she'd brush it off, saying she just wanted to feel good about herself. And while I wanted to believe her, the changes felt too sudden, too calculated. I started questioning myself, wondering if I was imagining things or reading too much into her actions. I didn't want to be the kind of person who doubted his partner, who turned every small action into something suspicious. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. One day, I decided to confront her again. I told her I felt like something had changed between us, that she seemed distant lately. She looked at me for a long time before answering, as if deciding how much to say. Finally, she told me, "I guess I've just been feeling restless lately, like I need something more in my life." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Restless? What did that even mean? I asked her if it was about us, if there was something I wasn't giving her or something I was doing wrong. She shook her head and said it wasn't about me, it was about her. That conversation left me reeling. For the first time in 12 years, I felt like I didn't know the person I'd shared my life with. She had always been open, honest, and direct with me, but now it felt like she was holding something back, something she didn't want me to know. As the weeks went on, the distance between us grew. Our conversations became shorter, more strained. The little moments of connection we used to share, like laughing at a silly joke or reminiscing about the past, seemed to disappear. It felt like we were living separate lives under the same roof. One evening, I walked into the living room to find her sitting on the couch, her phone in hand, smiling at something on the screen. When she noticed me, she quickly put the phone down and asked how my day was. Her tone was casual, almost too casual, and it made me wonder what she was trying to hide. I tried to ignore it, tried to push past the doubts and focus on the good times we'd shared. But no matter how much I tried, I couldn't silence the nagging voice in my head telling me that something wasn't right. And as much as I wanted to believe in us, in the strength of our relationship, I couldn't deny the cracks that were starting to show. And then came the moment that changed everything. A moment that forced me to confront the truth I'd been trying so hard to avoid. It was a Friday evening. I had come home early from work, hoping to surprise her with a dinner reservation at her favorite restaurant. I knew things had been tense between us, and I thought maybe a night out together could help bring us back to the way we used to be. But as I walked through the door, I was met with an eerie silence. The house was unusually quiet, except for the faint sound of her voice coming from the bedroom. She was on the phone, her tone soft and almost playful in a way I hadn't heard in a long time. I froze in place, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to respect her privacy, but another part of me, one that had grown louder with each passing day, told me to listen. "I can't wait to see you," she said, her voice low but filled with unmistakable excitement. My heart sank. It was like the ground beneath me had disappeared, and I was left standing on nothing. I felt a mixture of anger, confusion, and heartbreak all at once. Who was she talking to? And why was she speaking to them like that? I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. When she finally ended the call and stepped out of the bedroom, she looked startled to see me standing there. She forced a smile and asked why I was home early. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand answers, but I couldn't find the words. Instead, I muttered something about a canceled meeting and went to the kitchen. That night, I couldn't sleep. Her words kept playing over and over in my mind. I thought about every little thing that had felt off in the past few months. The late nights, the distant conversations, the way she always seemed to be on her phone. It all started to make sense, but I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe it. The next morning, I decided I needed to know the truth. I waited until she was in the shower and then picked up her phone. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it. I wasn't proud of what I was doing, but I felt like I had no other choice. If there was something going on, I needed to see it with my own eyes. What I found confirmed my worst fears. There were messages, dozens of them, between her and a man whose name I didn't recognize. The texts were casual at first, but as I scrolled further back, they became more intimate, more personal. It was clear that this wasn't just a passing friendship. She had been meeting him, spending time with him, sharing things with him that she should have been sharing with me. One message, in particular, stood out. It was from the night before. "I'll see you tonight," it read, followed by a heart emoji. My stomach churned as I realized she had been planning to see him while I was at work. She had lied to me, betrayed me, and now there was no denying it. When she came out of the shower, I was sitting on the edge of the bed with her phone in my hand. She froze when she saw me, her face turning pale. "We need to talk," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't say anything, but the look on her face told me she knew exactly what this was about. The conversation that followed was one of the hardest of my life. I asked her who he was, how long this had been going on, and why she felt the need to hide it from me. At first, she tried to deny it, saying they were just friends and that I was overreacting. But when I showed her the messages, she broke down and admitted the truth. She told me she had met him a few months ago through a mutual acquaintance. At first, it was just harmless conversations, but over time, it grew into something more. She said she felt like she had lost herself in our marriage, that she needed something to remind her of who she was outside of being my wife. I listened to her words, but they felt like knives piercing my chest. I asked her if she had thought about how this would affect me, how it would affect us. She said she didn't mean for it to go this far, that she never intended to hurt me. But her words felt hollow. How could she say she didn't want to hurt me when every action she took was like a deliberate strike against the foundation of our relationship? That night, I couldn't even look at her. I slept on the couch, staring at the ceiling and wondering how we had gotten to this point. I thought about the woman I fell in love with, the woman I married, and I couldn't reconcile her with the person who had betrayed me so deeply. The next day, she told me she needed time to think. She said she wanted to figure out what she really wanted, whether it was him or me. Her words felt like another blow, as if I wasn't even worth an immediate decision. I told her to take all the time she needed, but deep down, I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive her. But what happened next would test us in ways I never could have imagined. It was a week after our conversation, and the silence between us had become unbearable. We were living in the same house, going through the motions of daily life, but it was as if a wall had been built between us. She stayed in the bedroom for most of the time, while I avoided her by retreating to the living room or burying myself in work. Then, one evening, she walked into the living room and said, "We need to talk." Her voice was steady, but there was a tension in her tone that made my chest tighten. I nodded and gestured for her to sit down. My mind raced with possibilities. Was she going to end things? Was she going to try to fix what was left of our marriage? I braced myself for whatever was coming. She sat across from me, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. Finally, she broke the silence. "I've decided to meet him," she said. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. My heart pounded, and I felt a surge of anger rise within me. "What do you mean you've decided to meet him?" I asked, my voice sharp and disbelieving. She took a deep breath and explained that she needed closure, that she wanted to see him one last time to end things properly. "I owe him that," she said, as if her loyalty to this man she barely knew somehow outweighed her commitment to me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You owe him? What about what you owe me? What about what you owe us?" The argument that followed was unlike anything we had ever experienced. We yelled, we cried, and we hurled accusations at each other like weapons. She accused me of not understanding her, of not seeing how unhappy she had been for years. I told her that if she was unhappy, she should have come to me, not run to someone else. "Do you even love me anymore?" I asked, my voice cracking. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "I don't know." Those 3 words felt like the final blow, like the end of everything we had built together. I stood up and walked away, unable to look at her any longer. The next day, she told me she had already made plans to meet him that evening. She didn't ask for my permission or try to justify her decision. She simply stated it as a fact, as if I had no say in the matter. I told her that if she walked out that door, it would be the end of us. "You can't have both," I said. "If you leave, don't expect me to be here when you get back." She hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her options, but then she turned and walked away. I stood there, frozen, listening to the sound of her footsteps fading and the door closing behind her. It was the loneliest moment of my life. I felt a mixture of rage, heartbreak, and helplessness, all swirling together in a storm I couldn't escape. I spent the next few hours pacing the house, replaying the argument in my head and imagining all the things she might be doing at that moment. My mind was filled with worst-case scenarios, each one more painful than the last. I wanted to call her, to beg her to come back, but my pride wouldn't let me. When she finally returned, it was past midnight. She walked into the house without saying a word, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. I asked her how it went, but she just shook her head and said, "I don't want to talk about it." Her silence spoke volumes, and I realized I didn't need to ask any more questions. The damage had already been done. We didn't speak for days after that. The air between us was thick with tension and unspoken words. I felt like a stranger in my own home, like I was living with someone I no longer recognized. I couldn't stop wondering what she had said to him, what they had done, and whether she regretted any of it. The uncertainty was unbearable. Eventually, I confronted her again. I told her that if she wanted to fix things, we needed to be honest with each other. "I can't move forward if I don't know the truth," I said. She looked at me with a mixture of guilt and sadness and said, "I'm not sure if I can give you what you need." Her words felt like another knife to the heart. I asked her what she wanted, but she didn't have an answer. She said she was confused, that she didn't know what she was feeling or what she wanted for the future. I told her I needed time to think, too, and that maybe some space would help us both figure things out. The next few weeks were a blur of emotions. I vacillated between anger and sorrow, between wanting to fight for our marriage and wanting to walk away from the pain. I thought about the life we had built together, about the promises we had made, and about whether any of it was salvageable. She stayed in the house, but we lived like roommates, barely speaking and avoiding each other whenever possible. It was as if the love that had once defined us had been replaced by a gaping void, an emptiness neither of us knew how to fill. But as much as I wanted to believe that time would heal us, I couldn't ignore the reality of what had happened. The betrayal had left a scar that wouldn't fade, and the consequences of her choices were only just beginning to unfold. In the weeks that followed, the reality of what had happened began to settle in. We were no longer the couple that everyone admired. We weren't partners, confidants, or even friends. We were two people coexisting in the aftermath of a storm, unsure of how to pick up the pieces or if it was even worth trying. For a while, I tried to distract myself with work, with hobbies, with anything that could take my mind off what I was feeling. But no matter how hard I tried, the questions lingered. How could someone who had promised to love and cherish me be capable of something like this? Had I missed the signs? Or had she changed so much that I no longer knew her at all? One night, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Pictures of us on vacations, celebrating birthdays, and just being together. It felt like looking at someone else's life, a life that no longer existed. I realized how much I had idealized our relationship, how I had convinced myself that what we had was unbreakable. But now, all of that felt like a lie. The emotional toll was overwhelming. I found myself questioning everything, not just our relationship, but my own self-worth. Was I not enough for her? Had I done something to push her away? The doubt and insecurity ate away at me, making it hard to focus on anything else. Meanwhile, she seemed to be grappling with her own guilt. She tried to initiate conversations, to explain her side of things, but her words often felt hollow. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said more than once, as if that would somehow erase the pain. But the damage was already done, and no amount of apologies could change that. One evening, she suggested we go to therapy. She said she wanted to try to save what was left of our marriage. At first, I was hesitant. The idea of sitting in a room and airing our deepest issues to a stranger felt uncomfortable, even embarrassing. But I also knew that if there was any chance of moving forward, whether together or apart, we needed to confront the truth head-on. In our first session, the therapist asked us to share how we were feeling, to be honest and vulnerable. I spoke about my anger, my disappointment, and my sense of betrayal. She spoke about her unhappiness, her feelings of being lost, and how she had sought validation in the wrong place. It was painful to hear, but it also gave me a glimpse into her perspective, a perspective I had been too hurt to see before. Over the next few weeks, therapy became a space where we could express things we hadn't been able to say to each other before. I learned that she had been struggling with feelings of inadequacy and unfulfilled dreams, things she hadn't shared with me out of fear of being judged. She learned how deeply her actions had hurt me, how they had shattered my trust and made me question everything about our relationship. But as much as therapy helped us communicate, it couldn't erase the past. Every time I looked at her, I was reminded of what had happened. Every time her phone buzzed, I felt a pang of suspicion, even if it was just a harmless notification. The trust that had once been the foundation of our relationship was gone, and I didn't know if it could ever be rebuilt. As time went on, I began to realize that forgiveness isn't something you can force. It's not a switch you can flip or a decision you can make overnight. It's a process, a long, painful process that requires both people to be fully committed. And as much as I wanted to forgive her, as much as I wanted to believe that we could move past this, I wasn't sure if I could. One day, during a particularly emotional therapy session, the therapist asked us what we wanted for the future. I said I wanted clarity, peace, and the ability to move forward, whether that meant rebuilding our marriage or going our separate ways. She said she wanted to rediscover herself, to figure out who she was outside of being a wife and a partner. For the first time, it felt like we were speaking honestly about what we truly needed. We decided to take a break, a real break. She moved in with her sister for a few weeks, giving us both the space to reflect on what we wanted. During that time, I started to focus on myself. I reconnected with old friends, picked up hobbies I had neglected, and spent time thinking about what truly made me happy. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. When she came back, we sat down and had a long, honest conversation. We both acknowledged that while there was still love between us, it might not be enough to overcome what had happened. We talked about the possibility of separating, not as a failure but as a way to give each other the chance to heal and grow. In the end, we decided to go our separate ways. It wasn't a decision we made lightly, but it was one that felt right for both of us. She needed to find herself, and I needed to rebuild my life without the weight of betrayal hanging over me. It was painful, but it was also liberating, a chance for both of us to start fresh. Looking back now, I realize that relationships are never as simple as they seem. They're messy, complicated, and full of challenges you can't always predict. But they're also opportunities for growth, for learning about yourself and what you truly want out of life. And while our marriage didn't last, it taught me lessons I'll carry with me forever. And as I moved forward, I began to see that sometimes the end of one chapter is just the beginning of another. In the weeks following our separation, life felt strange and unfamiliar. The house, once filled with the sounds of our laughter and conversation, now seemed eerily quiet. The routines we had built together, morning coffee, weekend grocery trips, late-night TV marathons, were gone. I was left to rediscover what life looked like without her. At first, the emptiness was overwhelming. I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to send her a funny meme or stopping at the store to pick up her favorite snack before remembering that those gestures no longer had a place in my life. Grief comes in waves, and during those first few weeks, it felt like I was constantly being pulled under. But with time, I began to find moments of clarity and peace. I started to focus on myself in ways I hadn't before. For so long, I had been half of a partnership, and I had lost sight of who I was as an individual. Now, I had the chance to rediscover that person, to figure out what made me happy, independent of anyone else. I threw myself into new hobbies and old passions. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. I joined a hiking group and found solace in the quiet beauty of nature. I even signed up for a cooking class, where I learned how to make dishes I'd never attempted before. These small steps helped me feel alive again, reminded me that there was still so much to experience and enjoy. I also leaned on my friends and family in ways I hadn't before. They were my anchors during those difficult days, offering support and reminding me that I wasn't alone. Some of them shared their own stories of heartbreak and resilience, which gave me hope that I could come out of this stronger. Their encouragement helped me see that while the end of my marriage was painful, it wasn't the end of my story. One of the most challenging parts of moving forward was letting go of the anger and resentment I felt toward her. For a long time, those emotions consumed me. I replayed our arguments in my head, dissected every moment where things had gone wrong, and blamed her for the pain I was feeling. But holding on to that anger only kept me stuck in the past. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about excusing what she had done or forgetting the hurt she caused. It was about freeing myself from the weight of those emotions, about choosing to focus on my own healing instead of dwelling on the wounds she had inflicted. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but little by little, I began to let go. There were moments of reflection where I questioned my own role in the breakdown of our marriage. I thought about the ways I might have contributed to her unhappiness, the times I had been too focused on work or too complacent in our relationship. While her choices were ultimately her own, I couldn't ignore the fact that relationships are rarely one-sided. Acknowledging my own flaws was humbling, but it also gave me a sense of agency, a reminder that I could grow and improve moving forward. As the months went by, I started to feel a sense of freedom I hadn't expected. For the first time in years, I was making decisions purely for myself. I traveled to places I'd always wanted to visit, spent weekends doing exactly what I wanted, and explored interests I had never pursued before. It was liberating to rediscover my independence and to realize that I could create a fulfilling life on my own. Eventually, I started to think about the possibility of love again. It wasn't something I rushed into or even actively sought out, but over time, I felt my heart begin to open up. I met new people, formed new connections, and allowed myself to hope for the kind of relationship that would be built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding. Looking back now, I see how much I've grown since the day she walked out that door. The experience of heartbreak taught me lessons I might never have learned otherwise, about the importance of communication, the necessity of self-awareness, and the resilience of the human spirit. It showed me that even in the darkest moments, there is light to be found, and even in the deepest pain, there is an opportunity for growth. Life didn't turn out the way I had planned, but that's the thing about life. It rarely does. And while my marriage ended in a way I never expected, it also marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where I found strength, clarity, and a renewed sense of purpose. For anyone listening to this who might be going through their own struggles, I want you to know this. You are stronger than you think. The pain you feel now won't last forever. And while it's okay to grieve the life you thought you'd have, don't forget to look forward to the life that's still waiting for you. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to Wild Love Story and hit the notification bell so you never miss another tale of love, heartbreak, and resilience. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories too. Until next time, take care of yourselves and remember, every ending is a chance for a new beginning.